Hello everyone, it's Oliver Harper here, back with a new commentary on probably one of the worst sequels ever produced, Highlander 2, and this week's guest is Mathew Buck, aka Film Brain. How are you doing, Matthew?
I'm doing okay, probably will do a little bit worse after this.
yeah. How have you been coping with the old lockdown?
Okay, I guess, it's a bit hard to stay motivated sometimes, but I feel suddenly compelled very much when talking about Highlander 2. I feel like there's a lot to talk about here.
There is definitely, with all the sort of various different cuts and, you know, how the sort of film sort of panned out and their mad idea of changing mythology instead of being from the Highlands of Scotland, they're from the planet Zeist.
I certainly sympathise with the people under the shield.
So this version we are watching is the special edition, which is basically the Renegade Cut from the 90s, which has all the new jazzy visual effects from, I think this is 2006, this version?
Yeah, this is 2004, I think. 2004.
Okay. Well, everyone, if you wish to sync this commentary with your own copy of Highlander 2, then put the timestamp to 0 and press play now. So with this, you know, the new version of Highlander 2, this kind of, you know, 2004 edition, they reshuffle a lot of scenes, don't they? So instead of opening up at the opera house, it's sort of... No, actually, with the actual cut, it opens at the shield, doesn't it? Where he's testing it, and then they turn on the shield, and then it sort of flashes forward. So this version, it sets out the story that they've created this, you know, this shield to protect the ozone layer. And there's obviously a renegade group, the rebels, as it were, sort of believe the ozone is still fine. So it was repaired itself. Now, Matthew, I remember when I wrote my retrospective on this film a number of years ago, we were chatting about this, weren't we? And I recall you saying that your parents went to see this at the cinema. Is that correct?
Yes, apparently they went and saw this theatrically because they heard that the first Highlander was so good. So why not go and see Highlander 2? Because, you know, sequels are never worse than their predecessors. It turned out to be as terrible as predicted.
I think a lot of people were, I suppose, very surprised how this sort of film sort of turned out, because obviously we all know this. The original version, the theatrical, the first movie, that didn't perform very well in the United States. It was kind of poorly marketed. Some of the posters you can see online where you've got this kind of black and white photo of Christopher Lambert, and then in international markets though it did extremely well. Obviously, come home video and rental markets, that's where it found its success. So obviously buyers internationally, all these different distributors, wanted another sequel, but the first film ended so clear cut with low real kind of follow up. You can't. Where else could you go with it? And sort of gave them this huge problem of how to continue the film, despite there being no other warriors for Connor MacLeod to fight. Because he's now gained all these powers, which he can, you know, read people's minds and stuff, which he uses to sort of bring all these scientists together to build the machine to protect the ozone layer. So they cobbled together this weird story, don't they, about this planet Zeist.
It's absolutely bonkers. It's literally a textbook example of how not to do a sequel. I mean, we'll probably go into this a bit more over the course of the commentary, but I feel like all the various iterations to try and fix this movie, or try and make it more palatable, are all a bit of a fool's errand, because really, they were wrong right from the outset. It's not just that they go in completely the wrong direction, it's that they actively contradict things that were from the original film. And so, it seems like a sequel that's aimed at no one. Like, absolutely no one. Who is this for? Because people who enjoyed Highlander are not going to suddenly be like, yeah, they're aliens from the planet Zeist. Wait, what? And people who are coming into this fresh will be going, well, this story doesn't make a lick of sense.
Well, so they created an interesting mythology, didn't they, with the first one? It was quite loose, though, on its information. Because they tried to, I watched the first one again recently, which I still love to bits, because everything about the music and everything, the music really kind of wins me over.
Yeah.
But they're even trying to expand on, like, the Kurgan by Clancy Brown's character, but that's kind of very loose with the information about the bad guys in the movie.
Yeah.
So they've got a great concept which isn't really fully fleshed out, but because it's a movie, you can cut through things and people just accept it for what it is. So con number 2, logically, they would try and expand things, but they go completely the wrong direction.
Oh yeah, it feels like in this there was an attempt to, okay, let's explain where they come from, and that's the wrong tack to take with this. Ideally, what you would have done for a follow-up is do a prequel. You know, you follow Connor McLeod, maybe lean more into the period aspect of the first movie, because that was one of the things that people most remembered about it, along with that sort of present flashbacky structure. And so you could have him face up against another enemy in the past, meet up with other immortals, and still try and expand on the immortal mythology without having to explain where it comes from. Because there's this whole superstition of, oh, well, we can't fight on holy ground. Where does it come from? No one really knows. And in this, it's, well, they're aliens, and it's some sort of intergalactic competition they hold for criminals, I guess?
Yeah. It's like the visualization of Zeist as well. It seems to be they're pulling ideas from... Well, this movie's pulling loads of ideas from other movies where you've got the visual elements of things like Blade Runner, but also things like Dune as well.
Yeah.
So it's just cobbled together, you know, sort of... There's nothing wholly original about it, apart from, you know, the original idea they had, they've kind of squandered.
It feels like they went in a really hard sci-fi direction, despite the fact the last movie was not sci-fi, it was plainly fantasy.
Yeah. And that's, I think, it's probably a reflection of what was... I suppose films at the time, they were sort of, well, we've got to, how are we going to improve this? How are we going to sort of cater to more people? Is to go in the direction of science fiction.
And see, this is where the Zeist bit comes in. They've taken out the entirety of the voiceover in their infinite wisdom.
And said it in the past now, which makes no sense. So people in the past have better technology than today, and they're able to send people into the future as punishment.
And in these shots, they've replaced the original crashed spaceship with decayed buildings, which I suppose works kind of well if you're setting it in the past, but again, what is going on in these scenes? It feels like the scenes on Zeist, there's some sort of war, but there's never really any establishment of what they're fighting for, why.
What also hinders it is the production design of Zeist as well. If Zeist looked like something from the past, then they could probably just get away with it. But because there's clearly advanced technology there, with this kind of, you know, the interior of this complex, you just think, well, this can't be the past. You have to be an absolute idiot to sort of believe that. I think what I find also quite interesting is that the filmmakers all point fingers at sort of the insurance company and the bonding company who took over the final edit of this movie when obviously they moved everything to Argentina to save money, because the dollar was stronger and Argentina, you know, currency was so weak. But obviously they got there and the technicians, well, the industry was kind of falling apart, so they had to sort of bring in crew from the USA and the UK, things like John Richardson, who worked on the Bond films and Superman, sort of handle the production.
Yeah, they essentially brought a lot of the problems down themselves, because it looking over the production, it's like everything goes wrong. Everything. The script is bad. Then they decide to film in Argentina, which has no film industry whatsoever, so then they have to import everything, which makes them go over budget, and then a recession happens, and then they run out of money, and then the insurance company takes over the editing of at least one version of the film.
Well, yeah, it's like, once they obviously went over budget, you know, they had no money left, so they obviously took over. It's a similar situation that was got famously done on Blade Runner. So yeah, they now own the sort of final cut. But interesting thing is, they sort of, in the making of, we've seen sort of retrospectively later on when the producers have talked about this situation, is that it was the bonding company that made a bad film, but ultimately they were trying to salvage a bad film, because ultimately the script is its major fault, and no one can point fingers at anyone apart from essentially the writer and the producers who agreed to make this happen. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you look at this sequence here, and this is the fundamental sort of establishment of the story, in that the whole Zeist stuff happens very early on into the film, like 7 or 8 minutes into it, and already we've completely broken the Highlander mythology, and it's so integrated into the story that there's no way of removing it. And that's the fundamental problem with this, is, yeah, it's the past, but that's only because that's a bodge to try and, in some way, make it make sense with the original.
I think what I think they should have done is when they went back to sort of reshoot like that scene, that car chase sequence. So when they were going to the sort of the power station that drives the shield, they should have just literally got Michael Ironside and just reshot a bunch of whole new scenes to get rid of this sort of Zeist footage. Just to say, hey, this one guy, he's been, I suppose, like Highlander 3, where there's, the guy's been frozen or locked away for so long that the powers have forgotten that, there's one guy still left. Oh, okay, well, let's continue. Something like that. Yeah. Just to sort of get rid of all this stuff and just have him just be the main villain who turns up to give him shit in the future. Yeah,
but then that becomes actively having to rewrite entire sections of the film.
True.
So, therein lies the problem.
This sequence here is not in the theatrical cut, is it?
It's not in the British theatrical cut. For some reason, this one didn't make it in. We should, to clarify, there are 4 major versions of Highlander 2. So, to chronologically order them, there was the British version that was released first, which is about 100 minutes long. Includes a lot of the footage that later end up in the Renegade Cut and the special edition versions, but also lacks a couple of scenes that are in other editions of the film. And then there's the US cut, the 90-minute version, which is by far the most infamous version because it's so chopped up and there are scenes that are clearly placed in completely the wrong orders. And then there is, in the mid-90s, the Renegade Cut, which was done on Laserdisc. And then there's this 2004 special edition, which was done for the DVD, and has effectively become the de facto version of Highlander 2 now. This is the one that's on all the Blu-rays and all the most recent releases. And the British one has pretty much fallen into obscurity. There's virtually no home releases of it. The US cut is on the UK DVD in Pan and Scan, and on the very first French DVD. The very first DVDs have the Renegade cuts in the US, and then obviously the most recent versions all have this same HD master, which is quite problematic in a lot of ways.
It seems to go from a standard definition to high definition. It's really inconsistent throughout.
Yeah, you can tell that they made this as a DVD or a master where the switching between sources wouldn't have been as immediately apparent as it is in HD, where some shots go incredibly low res, some shots have scaling artifacts, especially when they do the new special effects, which were clearly output in SD, and I've got to be honest, probably look as bad as the original effects did in 1991.
It's interesting though, when I had reviewed this movie, I was just kind of amazed how a film so renowned for being bad would receive multiple cuts and have its visual effects improved. Now it's clearly down to that Highlander 2, despite performing badly at the box office, I'm sure it's for opening weekend it did extremely well based on the success of the first one. Then
it did very well from what I understand at the box office, at least at first, until people saw it.
2 weeks later, huge drop off. But it clearly made huge amounts of money on video, and that's why we've seen a Renegade Cut and a special edition. So there is clearly fans out there who enjoy it or just own it to the sake of completion.
I think there is a lot of morbid fascination about Highlander 2, but I also think there is a lot of people that are very much... There is a real dedication in the Highlander fan base, bless them for it, considering how much each iteration of Highlander after the original has its own set of problems. I mean, probably the only thing past the actual first movie that might be considered watchable is the TV series and the anime, and then everything else is kind of junk.
Well, also you've got Highlander the Source, which is apparently like, people
Yeah,
consider
even
the
worse than this one.
Worse than this. This makes it look, that film makes this look like, Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, and even that film, like all the Highlander sequels, I feel like it's bitterly ironic that the tagline for the Highlander series is "There can be only one," because there's never only one. All the Highlander movies have their own various different cuts. They never exist in one in one singular version. They always exist in like, oh, there's a director's cut. Here's a special edition with added special effects. And
here's a producer's cut.
Yeah.
But it's yeah. I just always find it fascinating. I think with movies that have troubled productions, they often prove to be the most interesting. Because obviously the outcome is just awful. You get an awful final product, or something that just kind of has potential but doesn't actually live up to what what people expected. To give this sort of film credit where it's due. I mean, I think visually, Phil Mayhew's sort of photography and Russell McKay using cinema, this sort of 2351 lens, of which he always kind of alternates between 185 and 2351. Because I've always, you look at Highlander, then The Shadow. They sort of have this kind of Academy ratio, kind of flat look to them. So I love the look of the movie. I think the production design is very interesting, despite it really kind of not fitting with, it's supposed to be the future, but everyone's driving around in cars from like the 50s and stuff. So
yeah, that's the thing about Mulcahy's movies, is that they do look very, very good. They do have a very stylish way about them. I know that I have a particular fondness for The Shadow, in spite of its faults. And that movie looks gorgeous with its period setting. And this, it definitely works on a production side of it. I won't argue that. I think that visually the film looks good. It's just the problems of what's actually happening within it.
Yeah. I think the production design of this movie, and probably Russell McKay himself, looked at Batman and thought, right, I want something like that in this movie. So Anton First kind of. It's the future of the 40s, and that's what we get in that sort of the square where they have the fight with those two, dudes from Zeist, technically.
But there is a lot, and I do mean a lot, of Blade Runner in here.
Oh yeah, the backlighting, it's so Ridley Scott, isn't it? With everything.
As we talk, the giant rotating fans, which seemingly became ubiquitous in sci-fi films during this period. I don't know why, but suddenly everyone had to start copying Ridley Scott's designs for Blade Runner, and it got to such an extent where it becomes absolutely farcical. You start counting how many shots have backlit rotating fans in them. The other movie that I can think of that really has it to the same extent is Roland Emmerich's Moon 44.
Oh yes, well that just rips off everything from Blade Runner, doesn't it? It's like a carbon copy in some places.
In that video, I literally kept a count of how many rotating fans there were, because literally how many times do they do it in that movie? And then this one almost takes it to its almost comical nadir with the giant scene with the fan where they try to decapitate them later on.
In a world of fans. But yeah, because obviously this, as I've rejumbled things, I mean, this cut is certainly more coherent.
Yeah,
but
it's the one with the most footage.
Yeah. But it's the puzzle is becoming a little bit more clear on what they wanted to try and do with this story. But because we've got this, really clunky attempt to correct Zeist, it still doesn't work.
Yeah,
and
I feel like it would be a better cut.
I think it makes it more confusing than originally, actually. Okay, if you just accepted they're from Zeist, okay, you just have to, that's it. But because it's now in the past, despite them trying to, correct the story in places and fill in gaps, it still makes the movie confusing.
That's what I think. I think it would be better if they just kept the Zeist stuff in, because just trying to replace it introduces more plot holes and contradictions than what it's trying to replace in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's not like Highlander 2 has any shortage of those.
Also with this sequel, that Michael Kamen didn't come back, which I thought was a bit of a shame. But obviously we've got Stewart Copeland, who was from The Police, the band, and also he's gone on to do many film scores and even video games and stuff. The score for this movie I thought was actually quite interesting, but doesn't really capture, I suppose, the sort of epicness and heart of the original, because that had Queen contributing to the music and Kamen orchestrating their music and vice versa. So it doesn't quite have the quite have the musical impact of the original, and that defined that movie. And I suppose ultimately, if they ever did a remake of the first film, they wouldn't have the Queen music, and it still wouldn't be the same without Who Wants to Live Forever and so forth.
I feel like the Queen music gives the first film its identity in a lot of ways, and it also enhances a lot of the themes of the film. You could tell that Queen wrote the music and were very specifically inspired by the screenplay. And there's a moment coming up where MacLeod puts on the jukebox one of the songs from the first movie, and you just go, oh, really? That's a really painfully on those moment. While we're talking about things that are happening on screen, we got this ridiculous scene, and I rewatched the US cut before we recorded this commentary, and what strikes you about the film's script in general is how many times they have characters literally pointing out the deficiencies of the plotting. In that last moment there, one of the bloody porcupine guys goes, but I thought MacLeod was going to die soon. And then Katana just hits him in the face for it. As if just hits him in the face for pointing out how much of a complete idiot he is.
I think Katana is probably the stupidest villain I think we've come across in these action movies. Because he could just let him die. And he'd be dead in like a couple of years,
And again, the special edition and the Renegade cuts actually extend that scene slightly. There's an added line where they point that out even further. Like, for goodness sake.
Dear oh dear.
And later on, there's that scene where Virginia Madsen is talking about, oh, well, if the guys come back from Zeist, that means you're immortal again until you kill them and you become human. And just really kind of taking a very long moment to point out how utterly convoluted and absurd everything that's going on in the movie.
Well, the writers put that in, isn't he? It must be like a joke, like, oh, this film is really confusing. Should we just make fun of it? We're self-aware that this film is shit.
It's like, no, you're pointing out your own laziness.
In the future, they actually, they made attempts to have their TVs 16:9.
Yeah. Speaking of which, in that last scene, what I found really amusing was John C. McGlinley there being interviewed against a brick wall. Why is he being interviewed against a brick wall? Is he doing a 90s stand-up? What's going on there?
There is some weird adverts later on, isn't there? They try to, I suppose it's kind of sort of elements of RoboCop.
Yeah, they throw in a bit of RoboCop for some indiscernible reason known to themselves.
Yeah. So the movie's kind of pulling from loads of different movies at the time to sort of this. We take one interesting element from there, one from there, and this will just kind of make this sequel to Highlander a success. Which ultimately doesn't actually have its own identity. Yeah. What it ends up with is just ends up being a sort of convoluted mess, which is funny in a way because if you go back to I listened to some of the interviews with Christopher Lambert, and he said even at the time when he was interviewed for this, the promos they had to do, the press junkets, he said, if you're a fan, of Highlander, want to see a sequel to it, don't go see this. And he got told off, by the producers that's screaming at him. And he's like, well, I can't lie to people. He said it's a good film, but it's not a Highlander film.
Yeah, he apparently wanted to walk from the film when he heard about some of the script changes.
Yeah, because he had no say in it, really. He did say the script needed to be changed. That was anything he could say because he was contracted to do a sequel when he signed on for the first one. But they obviously, probably thought, oh, this probably won't have a sequel made. But
we were talking about the way that especially the 90-minute US version restructures scenes. This is a good example of this. This scene happens a little bit earlier in the US cut, before the henchmen from Zeist arrive. And there's no real reason why this scene should be in the movie, except in this version, because the guys from Zeist arrive around this time, there's a moment where MacLeod looks at his wounded hand and it heals itself, which is included in this version, but isn't in the US cut, because that hasn't happened yet, and wouldn't make sense. And so, they're literally pulling out the justifications for why scenes are happening. Like, here is that moment right here. It's like, oh, it's a key establishing moment for why MacLeod understands what's happening. Whereas in the US cut, they just kind of show up, and I guess he suddenly realises, oh, I'm immortal again.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. So yeah, well, this version obviously clearly shows that they're trying to make that sequence kind of more clear, but also even with the graphical elements they've thrown in, where you see the people like, what is this? What's happening? Where there's kind of these energy beams or thing around the shield. It's kind of implying that they're coming from another planet anyway. It doesn't?
Yeah.
Those graphics don't indicate a ripple in time.
No, they don't.
Should be like Time Cop, as they go appear. Actually, they use a Time Cop effect in Highlander 3, don't they?
Do they?
Oh, they do, yeah. To teleport, they use literally where you see the bad guy just sort of ripple through time.
The sort of warp.
Yeah, the warp thing. Oh, it's literally like they've bought the FX package, a plug-in for their software.
I do know that one of the cuts of Highlander 3, they again went back and fancied up some of the effects, but I don't. Yeah, but so I think the HD versions don't have that in there. That was done for the Laserdisc and DVDs.
I've just got the Laserdisc, which has literally, I think it's like 4 minutes longer.
Yeah,
there's nothing major improvement that I remember.
But again, the added footage does help the movie in this longer cut because it makes it a bit more coherent in spots. The problem with the US cut is there is incoherence on top of incoherence, because literally someone is going, this needs to be a movie that runs 90 minutes long and will appear for the maximum number of showings each day. It doesn't matter what happens in those 90 minutes so long as it runs 90 minutes and we can send it out to theatres.
Yeah.
And so anything that isn't wholly related to the singular plot is junked. And the problem with that is that you get a movie where nothing is really fleshed out. One of the more subtle things that this longer cut does is in that opening stretch in the opera, which is way longer in this version, because what happens is you see MacLeod looking at the various people operating the Shield Corporation, both John C. McGinley's character and his friend who's being usurped by him, and those characters are established in that scene. They're not in the US version. You don't even know that they're there. They just completely chop them out. And those are those characters' introductions.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Well, you're right, though. In 90 minutes showing, get enough screens to show the film and make their money back as quickly as possible. But Russell Mulcahy said, that cut had a beginning, it had an end, but it didn't really have a middle act. And middle act is what holds everything together. So with this film does have a middle act. The two, obviously, when we'll get to that scene at the end. But I mean, the theatrical cut takes the fight in the middle of the film and cobbles it together with the end fight. So you have this kind of change of location very quickly.
One of the most egregious bits of continuity, and it just completely bodges up any sense of location or where anything is actually happening in relation to one another.
There's two dudes who appear, and they're just acting like idiots. He just goes MacLeod, just like
just
overacting.
Completely buffoonish villains who apparently cannot kill a 60-year-old man with guns that make things explode and being half his age. Why are their hair like porcupines? This is the thing that's so fascinating about Highlander 2. It isn't just a few decisions that went wrong. Literally every decision is, why did you do it that way? Why did you do it this way? What is Highlander 2? What are you?
It's funny because there's quite a few action sequences in the film, and the sword fights are really just boring to watch. I find that they lack the energy and the pace of, especially the first one. The battle at the end of the first movie is amazing. It's like you've got the backlit, all the glass there, and it's all like blue, and the camera's moving. It's like a jacked up music video. With this, it's just very much by the numbers. It's all wonderfully shot and covered, but it's just the fights are just really clunky. Christopher Lambert, he's got terrible eyesight, hasn't he? I mean,
I don't think that helps them. I mean, again, going back to decisions that are really sort of puzzling. Why, for this action movie, do you spend the first 25-30 minutes, depending on what cut you're watching, of him going around in old age makeup going, I'm old, What was the decision there? Like, it's just appalling acting, and then you have to put him in this action sequence where he has to pretend to fumble around not knowing what he's doing, although given that he can't really see, maybe that is just what he's doing.
Well, I suppose was it the powers he got at the end of the first movie was that he could grow old.
Yeah, he could grow old. So the immortal mythology is basically that they are essentially cursed to immortality, watching all the people that they love die. And also the rather lesser known one that people keep forgetting about is they can't have children. So essentially winning the prize gives them both mortality and the chance to have a child.
But also, they could have had an opportunity here for his character to have a child, But obviously, we see that his wife, his partner. I don't think it sort of implies they got married, but she died from the radiation poisoning.
Yeah, Brenda from the first movie.
Well, they bring back, don't they? But just put like a mask over her eyes.
Yeah, I think it's a different actress, but they brought her back for one scene, or well, depending on what cut you're watching, because that one didn't make it into the US cut for whatever reason.
This sequence here is probably the most impressive, I think, with the sort of the pyrotechnics. It is really,
maximum bombast.
It is. It's wonderful. It's really cool to see. It's always like the thing with the quickening. It's always like, it doesn't really make any sense, but okay, we'll just blow everything up around him as they absorb this power, isn't it?
I feel like in the first movie, they did it to about the right amount, and in this one, it gets to just silly. I mean, he's having the quickening, and then he gets hit in the face by a tanker with a pair of lips on the front of it.
Throw everything at him!
Just purely for the effect of him walking out of the fire looking young. It's completely absurd.
And then Virginia Madsen sees him and just like, oh my god, you're so hot. They have sex.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
This shot really bugs me here. This one here where he's clearly just lying on the ground in front of it. Like, he's not engulfed by the fire. Why didn't you cut around that? Bugs me every time. But you going on about the sword fighting, I think the explanation for that lies in the fact that it is so bombastic in that when they're fighting on that bridge a few seconds ago, the bridge collapses underneath them, knocks out the front of a theatre, and the sign explodes into a shower of sparks. And yeah, things like that happen in Highlander. But there was also good choreography going on, and most of the sword fighting, now that I'm looking at it, is just people just sort of swinging at people and getting blocked, swing, block, swing, block, over and over again.
Yeah, that's what the end fight with Katana is like. It's just like these big heavy swords, which is just swinging around in a very kind of uninteresting fashion. There's no rhythm to it. It's not like a dance sequence, which as you see,
they're not
Hong Kong
really
martial arts movies.
They're not really choreographing with the swords. You look at something like The Mask of Zorro and how amazing the sword fights are in those.
Oh yeah, sort of balletic in a way. Isn't it?
And in this, they're swinging the swords around like they're axes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the wire work here is actually surprisingly good. Despite you can see some of the support cables and areas, and the one that's attached to Christopher Lambert's kind of, you can see it on his waist to his feet as he kind of brings his legs up. I think this is John Richardson's sort of stuff. Obviously did the Superman stuff. But yeah, it's impressive sequence, but it's just another extended fight scene that has. We've now got him younger again, so we're going to see something a bit more interesting than just a clunky sword fight. But yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's a fine sequence. I don't really have a major problem with it. It's fine.
It's just so very long. It's just them. Like, yeah, the effect of them flying around is impressive, but then they can't really do anything once they're up there, and then it just goes on for ages.
Yeah, it goes for ages. It's like it's like they lost each other, didn't they? Where's he gone?
Like this whole action sequence of him battling these two guys, it goes on past the point where it's interesting.
Then it kind of essentially outstays its welcome.
Yeah. The action sequences in this film are so big that they go on past the point where you'd be interested in what's happening at any point. This is the kind of thing that I have with a lot of sort of big Michael Bay productions, is that they go for sheer scale, but then they lose sight of what the story is in that. Yes. And in this case, you've got a story you don't care about, and action sequences that just drag the movie along.
with the special edition, they obviously regraded the movie.
Yeah.
They took a lot of the colour out of it, didn't they? They sort of added a bit of a teal to it, and
I feel like in these scenes they haven't. These scenes look pretty similar to how the US cut looks, but on the scenes in Zeist, they definitely regrade them more red. So in the original cuts, the Zeist scenes were more of a more natural kind of blue colour, whereas the scenes in the past are now a bit more red. I mean, there is a bit more grading on individual bits and moments, especially because obviously the most major difference in terms of the colour is that shield backdrop, which is red in the old Zeiss versions and blue as originally intended in the newer cuts. Well, this cut specifically.
I always love it when they say like originally intended. It's like, oh, okay, it wasn't supposed to be red then. No. It's supposed to be blue with loads of planes flying over and all sorts. But it's I think the new effects are well done. I think they sort of do. I think some places they do kind of seamlessly blend. I think they did a good job on that.
Yeah.
Some of the rotoscoping that was in the original one still kind of make its way into this, and it's not particularly well animated.
Yeah.
But this whole bit here, I mean, it's he could always that was stupid. Even in this version, he goes, "Oh yeah, you can bring me back by just saying my name." It's like, okay, so for 40 plus years, he's not said that at all. Never said Ramirez. And now he's back.
Yeah, literally centuries have passed since Ramirez had died, and never at any point has he thought to revive him at any point. They just suddenly remember, oh, this is a thing that we can do because we got married on the planet Zeiss when we dipped our hands into the goo, whatever the hell that was.
Like Winnie the Pooh's honeypot, you know.
I love the attempt to give these guys connection, but do it in a way where you don't understand why. Like at the beginning of the film, Ramirez just sort of picks McLeod out of a group. And there's no real explanation. There's a ridiculous line in the earlier versions which is snipped out because it's so ridiculous, where he goes, "Let him feel the quickening!" Like, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? But it literally seems like Ramirez, knowing that they are going to get absolutely annihilated in the next 10 minutes, just defers his duty as commander over this group of rebels to just some guy.
Yeah. It's like they've obviously with Sean Connery coming back, I think it's the only other film, isn't it, outside the Bond films where he's done a sequel. Paid a huge amounts of money, very similar I suppose to Brando, but get essentially a small cameo, getting paid like I think nearly $4 million for this. Sean Connery's clearly having a blast playing the character again. His performance is really good in the film. I mean, Sean Connery, when he's even when he's kind of doing it by the numbers, he's still pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, it makes no sense for him to return. I think what they should have done is had him to be more of like an Obi-Wan Kenobi style figure, where his voice, you can still hear his voice like Conor McLeod can. Like at the end of the first one, he can hear his Ramirez's voice. It's like it's kind of in a sort of voice in his head. So that he should have appeared like as a ghost, maybe, I don't know. To come back.
He should have only appeared maybe in flashbacks or something like that if you were working in that sort of prequel narrative. And that's the problem with this, is that okay, we have to bring Connery back because he was one of the big selling points of the first movie, and also because him and Lambert got along so well that Lambert would only agree to come back, okay, if we brought back Connery. So now we need to bring back Connery, but how do we do that? He was very definitively dead. Oh, I guess we could come up with this ludicrous Deus Ex Machina. Oh, well, if he says his name during a quickening, that will bring him back. But then that just opens up more internal contradictions. And because they've introduced that element, that now means that he can bring him back whenever the pissing hell he wants now. Because, as I understand it, the game plan with the whole Zeiss stuff was that it was going to lead into a sequel that was wholly set on Zeiss, so we're getting even further away from the original at this point. And then you could, I guess, bring Connery back again, because even at the end of the film, when Ramirez sacrifices himself, McLeod asks, "Will I ever see you again?" "Who knows, Highlander? Who knows?" Wink. Like, oh, Are you coming back again in the next one then? Are we just going to keep bringing you back and you keep dying over and over again like Kenny from South Park?
Here comes this sort of the steamy sex scene, isn't it?
Yeah, completely gratuitous, out of nowhere. Makes no sense for these characters.
It was cut out, wasn't it, out of the theatrical cuts?
Yeah, it was. Well, it was cut out of the British version, I think.
Right. For
censorship reasons. I think Highlander 3 had a similar issue. Highlander 3, the British version, they cut out the sex scenes for the 15 certificate.
It's they've written into these movies, like, women seem to find the thought of being with a man who's immortal really attractive. In this movie, it's this their relationship is kind of, it just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't work at all. With the first one, okay, you've kind of got with the lady who works for the police, who's kind of, you know, a specialist in swords. That sort of love affair sort of develops, but I mean, it's still a little bit contrived anyway. But I mean, this here now, these set pieces. I mean, amazing location they've got here, wonderful stuff, and this is where she's got to try and piece together the bullshit kind of rules and mythology of this movie.
These characters have only known each other an hour, maybe two tops. I mean, certainly an hour before maybe less than that, before she bangs him in an alley.
Well, that's the quickening, isn't it? I suppose.
When she first met him, he was a 70, 80-year-old man who was dying, was incredibly unpleasant to her, and she still barely knows him. It makes no sense for the character. It's so incredibly demeaning for Virginia Madsen to have to act that out.
I suppose it's just down to that she respects him, I suppose, because everyone knows who Connor McLeod is. Because
there is a token line, I think, put in there of, oh, I used to look up to you and now you're just a broken old man.
Yes, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So he was respected now. I think the majority of people, you know, who've been misled to believe that he's kind of caused all their problems now.
Again, another plot point that kind of goes nowhere in any other cut of the movie.
Oh god, this bit. I mean, I tried to look actually at different shooting locations. I actually, you know, had these actors. Well, not probably any one of them who speaks English, just sort of shipped over from the UK to be this kind of pompous assistant as Sean Connery gets his new outfit by just literally trading in an earring. You know, how would they value that? You know, would they know its true value?
This subplot just adds more and more stuff that makes no sense. It's completely superfluous. Connery does virtually nothing in the movie. They go to all the effort to bring him back, and then he only actually shows up in the movie properly, in terms of the actual narrative, until about 10 minutes before the climax happens, and then he dies again.
Yeah. I mean, it just gets shot. He gets shot up in the car, then he gets cut up by the blade. You know.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest cameo, isn't it? It's just he's literally been crowbarred into the story.
Yeah.
For them to get Christopher and Sean to have some screen time for the third act.
It's pretty funny watching the original trailers for this film because they put so much emphasis on Connery's cameo.
Oh, they do, don't they?
Yeah.
Did you see this when it came sort of regular TV? Because I remember as a kid, I was a little bit older than you, so it was the movie on Sky Movies quite a lot. I think it did come to TV relatively quickly. Obviously, they need to sort of make up their losses, so the sort of turnaround from theatrical to VHS rental market to TV was quite quick. But yeah, I remember just being confused by it all.
Yeah, I didn't see this movie properly until I got that French DVD. So the first real time I watched it was the Zeiss cut.
Oh right, so you went invested in the French one, but you couldn't get the UK pan and scan one.
Well, I decided to opt against the pan and scan one because the French disc was in widescreen.
Oh, it was in widescreen. Okay.
Yeah, so I figured that was the best version to get, and I got that for a couple of quid. I think my first proper real experience of Highlander 2 was probably Spoonie's review of it, because he did cover it way back in the day.
He did, didn't he? Yeah. I think for me, my sort of proper sitting down and watching it all was the Renegade Cut on Laserdisc, because it was I knew it was kind of bad anyway. I had the first one on Laserdisc, a sort of director's cut, which is essentially the UK cut just released in America, because I cut out two scenes, didn't I, with the Say's little girl during World War II. I think another sequence as well. But it was seeing this kind of new version. I thought to myself, oh, okay, kind of makes sense, but I was still a bit baffled by it all. I think the commentary is quite interesting to the movie by the director.
Oh man, this shot here. Sorry, in both shots, the plane establishing shot flying against the shield looks awful in different ways.
I do think it's better than their original version, which literally like an Airfix kit.
The composite is awful in all the shots of the theatrical version, because they clearly shot them with one lighting and then put this backdrop that doesn't match, and then.
Well, didn't they? Because some of the effect shots in the theatrical one, they're so cobbled together where you can clearly see there's the bottom plate, then there's the top plate, then there's a middle plate which is just black.
Yeah, you've got big chunky matte lines.
Yeah.
And sometimes the composites look blown out. That shot of shield control when she storms into it very early on in her introduction, that establishing shot looks horrendous.
Yeah,
in the Zeiss cuts.
They do, don't they? Because even when Katana looks out the window and you can see the shield, it's all blurry in the original one. It's just like it's even smudged up with Vaseline. It's like VHS compositing.
Now, this is a scene that they added in to try and give it a little bit more linkage with Highlander. It does feel like a lot of the additional material tries to link it in with the previous film, if they can help it. And one of the major changes that they did for the two recut versions is apparently bring it more closer in line with the script, which has more of a structure in line with the original Highlander, where you flash back and forth between two time periods, whereas the Zeist versions, for the most part, tried to present their story relatively linearly.
Yes, that's right. I mean, that's such a clever thing about the first one, wasn't it? Where you had these wonderful transitions to the past and to the present. Russell McKay's very clever cuts. I say sometimes in the first Highlander film, it's literally in the present for like 2 minutes and it goes back to the past.
Yeah.
It can't sort of sit still for some moments in the movie, as you say. But this one's far more linear. But they are trying to throw in sort of elements to the past, which is still stupid though.
Yeah.
They're in the past now, looking at the future. He's oh my god, he's back to normal now. Well, I've got to stop this.
Like, this effect's not very good. It's literally just putting a superimposed image of a screen on top of the filmed footage. And this shot looks so bad because the frame rate suddenly drops on this shot, and it doesn't do that in the theatrical version. I don't understand why this shot looks so bad.
Oh, when he sort of teleports, isn't it?
The psychic cook there, one of the RoboCopy bits, this was in the British version but not in the US cut. And again, why is this in here? Doesn't make any sense. But the idea of them watching the action on screens, I think, was something that they wanted to do when they were making the film, but never actually got to accomplish. Apparently there was an idea of the Zeistian elders watching the climax from the original Highlander to try and backwardsly integrate that whole thing in there. But obviously they didn't shoot any of that material.
That would have been awful if they did that. It's just more nonsense. They're digging a bigger hole here, you know.
And here it's inserted into this cut, and it, again, makes no sense, because it's the past. They're not aliens anymore. How do they have this technology?
This whole train sequence, it's despite it being, I suppose it's quite well executed with how it's shot, and you've got weird things where this guy's eyes are popping out his head, a bit like Mad Max 2, you know, or even in the first one they do that. But it doesn't really amount to anything. It's not actually progressing the plot at all. He's just kind of landed. It's just another excuse to have an action scene.
I should mention Michael Ironside at this point. So I read Michael Ironside's Random Roles interview for AV Club, and he talks about this movie quite
wonderful.
a bit. In fact, he talks about this specific moment that has just passed here, where he goes through the roof of the train. He did that himself because his stunt double injured himself.
That's right.
Doing the stunt the first time. Apparently, his stunt double was getting into all kinds of mischief on the set of this movie, and which he goes into in that interview, and I probably will not repeat just in case I get it wrong and end up being potentially sued. But he mentions doing that stunt, he hits his head slightly on one of the rails, but the bit where he pulls himself back very slowly apparently was him making sure that he hadn't broken anything in the fall.
Oh, right.
So, and then he sort of styles out this, yeah, that was great, yeah, and which is a fantastic moment. And Mulcahy thought so himself, because apparently that was the moment where they really kind of got a sense of what Katana was as a character and really tried to play upon it.
He just, his dialogue's mostly rubbish throughout. Katana's is, and Ironside, he's always, he gives you what you want basically, and he just plays it to the top, goes up to 11 with everything, and he's just playing a sort of comical kind of villain, really. He's a bit of a buffoon in some cases.
So the way that he described it is he knew he was in a bad film. He said he described the script as being written by a 13-year-old. His character made no sense. So I think he said something along the lines of, if I'm going to be in this fucking piece of shit movie, I'm going to be the most memorable fucking thing about it. And you can definitely tell that's what he's trying to do. Is there is no top to this performance. It just goes higher and higher, and in this scene, it's just completely absurd. It's that moment in the original where the Kurgan hijacks the car and drives it recklessly.
Yes.
But just pushed up to about 500 miles per hour, literally.
Oh, yeah. It's just, it's I suppose it's essentially a repeat of what we've seen before. I mean, it's repeat and just kind of improve upon it, but it doesn't quite have the sort of, the execution is not, it doesn't work quite as well. I think with the first Highlander film, you've got the great Queen music playing in, and it's showing, to us that he could easily kill the woman because, he's immortal. So he just, smash the car up and he'd be fine, she'd be dead.
It establishes the character as being a threat, whereas in this scene, it makes him look like a comical buffoon.
Yeah.
He just goes into scenes and just kills people willy-nilly, which has the reverse effect of just making him seem absolutely absurd. Not to mention the fact that this scene is just preposterous. Like, why would this happen? Why would it happen this way? Why does the train go so fast that it defies the laws of physics and shoots sparks down the side of it?
It's like they're going into space, because they've literally lost gravity,
It's like, why does the train have a capacity to go 670 miles per hour?
Oh dear.
Just completely ridiculous.
I've got the head of TSC?
TSC, the Shield Corporation, as it's imaginably known.
yeah. Well, the gentleman from Scrubs and
John C. McGlynn.
That's right. Yeah, Office Space, tons of movies. He's very good at playing snivelling kind of villains, and he just plays essentially a kind of I suppose a sort of a bit of a yappy, but also a guy who's just all about money. It's a cliched kind of executive who unfortunately gets his balls cracked or crushed later on with the guitar. It was a horrible sound effect, and nicely screams out. This gentleman here obviously looks a bit like Albert Einstein, who created the Shield.
Again, the whole Shield Corporation is another one of those things that doesn't make any real sense if you put any kind of logic into it. Because if it was a planetary shield that was designed to save the world, it would not be run by a money-making corporation in this way. It wouldn't be this evil capitalist group like it's depicted in this film because they need villains. Like, why would Connor associate with a group of people running a company like this if he was planning to save the world?
It's like one company to have a monopoly, and it's a very naive kind of way of writing to say, okay, we've got to have a villain of this piece who isn't just from another planet, Zeiss, but also on Earth. We have this kind of capitalistic kind of attitude of just having these guys who are just all about profit and won't shut it down, despite the ozone layer being repaired. But there's quite a lot of movies around this time, weren't there? Where just like the villains would be a company, and maybe it's the same as like RoboCop. We've got OCP who are their intent is to get rid of crime in a sort of noble way, I suppose, or creating not really noble, but in an effective way to sort of do it quickly. But they're run by people who have no empathy. They don't care.
Again, it is, as you say, the RoboCop influence. It's them trying to do OCP. Even the font of the TSC looks a bit OCP-ish, actually. Now that you bring that up, and you go, oh, that's where that comes from. It's them pilfering from things, but not in ways where it would actually make sense for the story. It just seems like they're just taking random bits from popular sci-fi films of the time and then turning them into this weird mush. Now, again, this is one of those big changes where this scene for the theatrical versions was placed at the front, and there is that nice, very Highlander-like transition there from Connor putting the goggles on in the film's ostensible present, say future 2024, to the scenes in 1999. That's effective. At the same time, though, I would potentially argue that placing these scenes at the start of the movie, like the other versions do, might have had more of a benefit for audiences, because this is nearly an hour into the film, and we haven't really properly established what the hell is going on.
Yeah, because all they do is throw in a little bit of text at the beginning to rectify the sort of the changes. And yeah, but as you mentioned earlier, though, Matthew, with this version they were also trying to construct it more so it would have this jumping between the past and the present more often. I think it fits that structure better. But yeah, it does sort of compromise that the audience being informed by having it moved to an hour into the movie.
Yeah. Like, this is essentially an instigating action for the plot, and we don't see it for a very long period of time in this cut. And I'd imagine people being very confused for a good chunk of the movie.
You can see even the miniatures in this movie aren't particularly well shot. There's the satellite, as you see it later on, get destroyed, but the first shot of it's all like the footage is still a bit like dirty and grubby. It just seems to be like this little miniature just dangling on a wire. It doesn't really look very effective.
And they're not lit very well either.
No, lit poorly. As you say, again, the fans and backlighting. More fans. There we go.
Yes, I would like my office with a giant rotating fan for review.
I'll make it so.
So I think this character here, MacLeod's friend, is probably the one that gets the most lost in the Zeiss cuts, especially because, again, we've taken out a lot of the character's introduction. It's not entirely clear what his role in the plot is.
Yeah, because is this sequence in the theatrical cut? They're sort of
this of them typing, a little bit of it is, but this bit with the latitude, no, it's not.
Right, because we do find later on that the scientist, the old gentleman, is in essentially prison, isn't he? He's been locked away. And
they throw him into Max.
That's right. Yeah. It's as you mentioned, with the sort of the truncating the sort of the film by cutting most of the meat out. You just end up with a few scenes that kind of just very loosely fit together without any kind of real character motives, or you get to know about these people, and that's what gets you interested in these movies or any story in general, is getting to know these people, but we don't get to know them very particularly well in the theatrical cut.
And McGlinley's character is so over the top that he just seems like a massive caricature. Again, not helping the fact that the plotting is unbelievable. You don't believe him as a person. Apparently, McGlinley claimed that he based his performance on Orson Welles. I don't really hear that in his performance, apart from the fact that he's talking with a really deep voice, slightly, in a really kind of smug, arrogant way. But you wouldn't listen to him and go, oh yeah, he's doing an Orson Welles impression. He's not exactly talking about frozen peas or anything like that. But, McGlinley's performance, McGlinley can be good in the right roles. Dr. Cox, I think, is a dream role for a guy like McGlinley. But then I've seen him in other stuff where he's terrible and really bad, especially when he's playing villains and he's just given full license, like he has been here. It feels like Mulcahy loves his villains to go over the top, and having those scenes where Ironside and McGlinley play off of each other are kind of fun in that way. But both of those performances really need to be curtailed.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like John Lithgow's performance in Ricochet, which Russell McKay did, which I think was a really underrated movie.
Right around the same time, actually, as well.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you're right. I think he may have. Did he do it straight after this or before this? Because they're both 91.
They were both released in the same year, I think.
Yeah. So that movie unfortunately hasn't been given a proper sort of Blu-ray release. There's a sort of HD version floating around, but with the wrong aspect ratio.
Yeah, I've got a DVD in the wrong aspect ratio, but at least it's better than...
It's a scope movie,
Yeah.
It changes to 185 once the credits finish. But John Lithgow in that movie, he's over the top and comical. And yeah, it sort of goes with your theory with Russell kind of pushing the villains to be, more than just a regular bad guy.
And McGlindy's character in this, the two villains, really, they have these two villain characters, but their motivations are completely different from one another.
Oh yeah. They
completely intersect, but they don't really intersect. There's no reason for these characters to get together. There's no reason for them to be interested with each other, other than the plot requires them to bundle up together.
Yeah. They're, I suppose the only thing they can relate to, they both want to get rid of MacLeod.
Yeah.
Obviously, the theatrical cut, this is oddly where Katana walks into TSC.
Yeah, I was going to
weird.
mention that again. Messing around with the geography of the movie and everything by moving scenes around, this scene immediately precedes him going into the S.H.I.E.L.D. Corporation meeting, so essentially this ends up being the establishing shot of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Corporation building.
Yeah. It makes no sense. It's like, oh yeah, the headquarters of this, really wealthy company have a sort of run-down kind of exterior, Yeah, obviously, I do sympathise with the filmmakers who were frustrated by the insurance company cobbling together this kind of rough cut where they just didn't care. Because, if any sort of editor involved will go, well, this doesn't make sense, continuity is all skewed. They'd be like, oh, well, we're not going to change that. You go, well, I'm not going to, why risk it? But because it's still going to make the movie a failure if you make it, if you edit it so badly, it's not going to work.
And again, that shot of Katana walking into the building there in the US cut, that's repurposed to MacLeod walking into the room. It completely changes the context
That's
of the
right,
shot.
yeah, because you've got this kind of very, very cool opening sequence, don't you? You've got this kind of backlit from behind, and you see MacLeod walk in. And this is another sort of Robocop-y style advert, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
the only one that's in the US cut, which makes it seem even more jarring.
I do like Sean Connery's reactions, though, to it.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Why does he look so astonished at the concept of flight in general, especially in the original cut of the film where he's an alien and there are spaceships?
That's true.
At least in this version, it makes a little bit more sense if he's coming from the distant past, but not in the original cut of the film.
They could have just called this Highlander 2 Back to the Future.
Yeah. This shot looked especially egregious in the US.
Oh, it's horrendous.
Cut.
They've actually created a little bit of camera movement, haven't they, with the background. It's like four elements there, actually, because there's something in the foreground as well that sort of moves. It does look a lot better than it did. It's basically they're now in Gotham, basically.
And that shot appears much later in the US cut. They placed that sequence right after he kills John C. McGlinchey's character.
I think the worst of the FX shots from the theatrical is when MacLeod and Ramirez drive to TSC, and you see them drive to the building, and you've got literally the plate of them driving, a big chunky black line, like chunk of the picture just empty, and then you've got the sky. It's so shit. I don't know what they were thinking with that. But obviously, the lady there on the left there married the FX guy, isn't he? I think he talks about in the making of the movie that he kind of worked on his film, and then I think obviously they met a number of years later and got married. This is now sort of continuing with the original rules of Highlander: no fighting on holy ground, which doesn't really make any sense. Still,
not now that they're aliens.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, that's So these two scenes are in the British theatrical version. This flashback sequence here where he's visiting the dying Brenda was not in the US cut, but in the British version it was one of the scenes moved to the start of the film. Which I guess kind of works in that context. It gives an instigation for MacLeod to create the shield, and it puts the key info up front. That said, it does probably work better in this spot here. The chronology of the middle act in particular is substantially improved in the special edition, because now there is suddenly a sense of why things are happening and where they're happening in relation to each other. So we have this scene where oh, actually, I was slightly wrong there. So, the British version has this flashback scene and puts it at the start, but the scene where he's at Brenda's grave later on was not in the British version, but it was in the US cut, which is why I got a little bit confused there.
I mean, cutting this bit is just bonkers. Look at that. That's an amazing piece. Like
that's the only shot they have in the US cut. That one establishing shot playing over a radio recording talking about people dying. Everything else is junked.
In the bin. Look at that. Oh, the grading here is really not particularly good. They've really pushed up the contrast too much, really, I think. But it still didn't really make any sense about fighting on holy ground in the original film, because there was no sort of... I mean, there was this kind of concept of hell and heaven. I never mentioned heaven though. They talked about hell, where he's like, "Yo, Ramirez, you're gonna sleep in hell tonight," when he cuts his head off.
Yeah, and there is the sort of ghostly side of it. I think it's more sort of a superstition, which kind of makes sense given where the characters came from at first.
And that's the thing. And it's the thing. If they were going to do the sequel, which obviously with this one, but was to explore more of that mythology and have it be, as you say, a prequel. But at that time, the idea of a prequel would just seem bonkers, wouldn't it? Because we didn't see prequels. When was the sort of first sort of movie to have a proper prequel? I mean, Temple of Doom is essentially a prequel, but it's I suppose the Star Wars films really sort of made it popular.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think it was kind of rare to see a proper prequel at this point in time, even though in Highlander's case it would have made way more sense. See, in the US cut, they have this scene in there, of this scene of Katana antagonizing Connor, but it comes to nothing. Whereas in this cut, it directly precedes him fighting in the building. And then suddenly it makes more sense because now he's baiting him. He's trying to get him to fight, and that now it suddenly makes slightly more sense, even if we end this scene on a dick joke.
There's almost a puzzle me with these movies that when the hero goes up against a villain, they have a fight, and then they just sort of leave each other alone for a bit, and then they come back again. It's like if it was such an urgency, you'd be constantly at him trying to get his head off. Like in the first film, where the Kurgan, Clancy Brown's character, MacLeod never encounters him for like 4-5 centuries. I'm like, where's he been? Surely, they would have bumped into each other. And, there's the other sort of other Highlanders that are floating around in the first movie. He's made friends with some of them over time, which I thought was always quite interesting, that they, not everyone was out to kill each other, even though ultimately they had to kill each other. But there was still a kind of friendship, kinship between them.
Okay, this moment here, sorry, just to pause you for a second.
Sure.
Was MacLeod in a football team?
Matthew, he's in everything, all right? I suppose he's not on the moon at one point, He gets involved in everything. It was kind of natural that he would be either a historian or a antiques dealer. I think someone who would live for 500 plus years, that's one thing they'd do.
That's something they should have explored, though. This idea of a guy who kind of lives in the past. It feels like something that they never really explored in Highlander, apart from the detail of him being an antiques dealer and a lot of his appearances. And yeah, they have this scene that kind of anchors it to the first movie, but again, everything is so far gone past that, it doesn't really land properly.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's all, it's the intent is what is there, and it's wonderfully done, but it's just, it doesn't doesn't stick, does it? Because everything's just been undone from the beginning. I mean, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert's review of this is glorious with their sort of with their review of it on the show, and then it does their separate review with the worst of 1991 list, and it's great.
I do remember Roger Ebert's print review. He mentions how it would be a movie talked in sci-fi circles for years to come, and he was absolutely right.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's why he has a Pulitzer.
I mean, it's. I don't think Highlander 2 is so bad it's bad. I think it's still actually it's still watchable. I mean, despite its kind of its failed attempts at a sequel, it's not a Highlander sequel at all, because of its problems. But I can still kind of watch it and just sort of laugh at it and just think, oh my god, what are you doing, guys? Why did you shoot this? I suppose it's a wonderful exercise in how not to do a sequel, and people can learn their lessons from
how not to make a movie generally.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, mismanagement.
Again, moving scenes around and making things unclear is a good example there with the cab driver. That in the US cut, that guy dropping from the ceiling, you don't know who that is, and the camera angles don't make it clear what it is. There is a small shot in this version that makes it clear who that is, the cab driver, but also in the US version, even if you did know who that was, it happens so long after that scene, you wouldn't remember it, or why is he dangling that guy from the ceiling? Whereas in this version, it sort of makes sense because of its proximity to the previous scene where he antagonises the cab driver.
Yeah.
I mean, these aren't small decisions. These are people actively not understanding how things like plotting or structure work. In a movie where already they've got serious problems with plotting and structure.
It also shows you that Katana is really not matched to McLeod, because he's already hacked at his stomach. You know, he's Ironside is probably not as skilled, I suppose, as Clancy Brown with a sword. I mean, I suppose Clancy Brown was still quite sort of lumbering because he's so big. But why does Katana's sword need to extend? It's just it has to be done because it looks cool.
Well, that's the thing with Katana. And we should mention that Katana, for some reason, does not have a katana.
Should have just called him Nunchuck. He still had no Nunchuck.
I'm an alien named after a Japanese sword.
What's good there? The shot in the background actually had people walking around. I've never noticed that before.
Again, moving this scene towards the end of the film makes a total mockery of any kind of continuity, because that shot of the city there, the way that the US print is structured makes it appear like Max is a remote high security facility, and the entire climax and where the shield, I guess, is right next to it, which is not true at all. But then there's this fight, and they have that shot where they come out the window, and then suddenly there's a cityscape below them.
Yeah. It also demonstrates that TSC it's kind of like the structure of it is falling apart inside. It's like it's kind of derelict, which doesn't make any sense. So this certainly makes I think far more clear. I mean, this is Christopher Lambert doing that stunt himself, which is pretty daring.
But again, although this is essentially the capper onto the second act, this big fight scene, which is why moving it makes the whole middle portion of the US cut feel so draggy and long, because essentially it focuses on Ramirez just trying to get into meeting Connor and flying on the plane so much of the time. But it just, again, as you pointed out, they have these confrontations between the Highlander and the bad guys, but then the bad guys have this perfect opportunity to kill him and then just leave him.
Yeah, it's typical traits of storytelling, isn't it? So, I will just leave him now. Bye-bye. I'm going to go home, have a bit of rest, have a bit of a kip, and then come back and kill you.
I feel like the Highlander sequels, one of the big problems with them is that they've never got past Clancy Brown's performance as the Kurgan. Clancy Brown was incredibly scary in that role and made a formidable impression. And every villain since then is literally doing a piss poor impersonation of him.
Yes. I mean, also Clancy Brown's character was also a bit clumsy because you just, when he kills Ramirez, even doing that fight with him, he's like falling off stuff, and it's funny. And he's portrayed to be a bit of a goof as well as some places, but he is terrifying because what accompanies him is also. Actually, at some moments there's a bit of a Terminator-style music to him when he's kind of in the hotel, which is quite strange. But he just threatens everyone, and what he does is, still over the top and villainous. But as you say, it is essentially they've just been told to do a carbon copy of what Clancy was doing. Okay, Matthew. So if you had to pitch a new villain, what would he act like?
That's a good question. I think just having maybe a different take on an immortal, maybe someone who is maybe more overtly religious might be an angle, or maybe someone who is more a competition, sort of, I guess more kind of, I guess maybe sort of a maybe suave kind of type. Do something very different.
Yeah,
maybe.
I would have someone who's essentially like the dark shadow of Connor.
Yeah,
he is somewhat similar, in his appearance, I suppose. But he's, it's all a bluff. He'll pretend to be your friend and stuff, and he's going to kill you. But
have someone out for vengeance. Have someone who blames MacLeod for something that happens in their past, and then you can again play into that whole lineage. Yeah,
like he was supposed to be the one. He was a good guy as well, but then he turned. MacLeod stole the prize, and he's been bitter ever since. Something like that. They've done it before in other movies, similar plot devices. But here we go. We've already thought of something interesting in about 5 minutes. to write
More
that.
than the people that worked on this movie did.
They were paid.
So again, this whole thing. Now they're suddenly having this frolicking fight. Why do they shoot sparks? They're having this frolicking fight scene set to comical music.
Yeah. I always love it with these swords. They have sparks. In the first one, there's a bit of a spark action. I suppose they get confused. They're not lightsabers, guys. They're swords.
But one of the things that I noticed rewatching it the other night is how much virtually when any action scene happens, Virginia Madsen is just asked to hide somewhere. Like that just happened a minute ago. He asked her to hide on the staircase. And when the Zeist goons show up, he puts her in a dumpster in clear sight of them that would in no way hide her because they saw where she was. And it's just an awkward way of getting her out of the scene so they don't have to choreograph around her, which is so frustrating because they'd established her as being essentially a terrorist leader, as someone that can carry herself. And then, for the rest of the film, she's just treated as the token damsel.
Oh, yeah, she has nothing to do in this movie from now on. I mean, she essentially becomes his taxi driver as they drive to the power station, to disable the shield. And that is it. That's her only thing left for her to do. Her
character arc essentially completed when she told MacLeod that the shield is normal.
Yeah, exactly. I always feel sorry for Virginia Madsen. She's a fantastic actress, but she's in quite a few duffers. Films that just didn't hit in the market, or some was just poorly marketed and they failed. I love Electric Dreams, and that film was just a massive bomb. And she's great in that, and she's good in most films she's in. It's just like she just picks the wrong movies, I suppose.
But this scene here, finally, you've got Ramirez back into the plot, but it's an hour into the movie. If you're going to bring the two characters back, why didn't you bring them back longer?
Yeah. To have this kind of great buddy cop style thing, going throughout the film. But then they would literally overpower Katana because he's a useless prat,
Well, that's the thing. Oh, I guess the fan's not on in this scene.
Yeah. It's getting quite cold in there, I think. Turn it off.
Speaking of which, speaking of switching things off, this is the moment where, as he just said, we can't turn the shield off because it would require more energy than there is on Earth. What? What?
just a simple switch, sir. I love how the guys in the background look like from that. Oh god, what was that 80s cartoon where they had the toys you could interact with the TV show? Captain Power. That was it. These two like literally from Captain Power. Because you always got to have like stormtrooper style villains, haven't you? In the background, they're soldiers.
See, the thing about the whole bringing Ramirez back into the plot is, okay, we're going to do this double act.
Yeah.
And I like the very brief amount they do that. The scene where they charge into the building and just go into like a hail of gunfire.
Mm.
That's kind of cool. Them taking advantage of their immortality like that.
Yes.
It feels like these movies take very little advantage of the fact of, oh, the characters are immortal, so they can do things that would kill normal people, and really kind of play around with that. It's one of the very few instances where they do that.
It's like when you see some superhero films where the filmmakers don't really take advantage of this superhero's powers that much. You know, there's so many prime opportunities to do something, but they don't do it due to the convenience of the plot. But yeah, I mean, this is, it's still a contrived element of bringing Katana in to sort of team up with the head of TSC. It's just, he doesn't need to be there. No. He could either, I suppose, manipulate it in a way, set a trap. But I mean, it's it's just an excuse for them to sort of have them come together. Yeah,
it feels like there are scenes missing. It feels like there's scenes that they hadn't shot where Katana understands that MacLeod actually built the shield and then has a reason to go here. I mean, I guess he kind of knows because it's implied that he's been watching MacLeod, even though there's no reason for him to keep on watching him if he's attained the prize and has not gone back to Zeist. See, this, again, going back to the whole thing of, going back to Zeist. See, that moment there where he goes, yeah! That seems like them trying to capitalise on the bit on the subway train. At least it did to me. But anyway, going back to the point I was trying to make. The whole thing about the Zeist intro is that they mention that before they get transported, and again, I'd like to see the logistics of that. Like, did they end up in someone's womb? Like, how... Were they born again, or did they just suddenly appear and just like, I guess we'll accept him into our clan?
It completely undoes the idea that Conor McLeod had grown up in Scotland, instead of from a child to an adult. It's like implied that he's just appeared there, and now he's going to become the head of the clan. But
he mentions to Ramirez, if I win the prize, I'm going back. Well, if that's the case, he won the prize, he didn't go back. I guess he forgot. And then he wins the prize again, technically, and then he forgot.
It's like they didn't even watch the movie, the first movie just before rewriting it, just to refresh themselves, But it's the screenplay's done by the same guy. I mean, obviously the story's conceived by someone else. It was Peter Bellwood or something like that. He did the screenplay for both movies, and he'd obviously have a great groundwork to work from for the original film. But for this one, going out on his own, essentially, I think there's another draft by someone else, but there's like 3 names credited, but Peter takes full credit for the screenplay, and it's and its faults. But yeah, it seems that I suppose it's an influence of probably many financiers wanting different ideas thrown in from different markets, and it's tailored. It's just too many cooks in the kitchen again.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is that what makes it so bizarre is that it comes from most of the same team members as the first movie. You've got the same producers, you've got the same cast, you've got the same director. All of them are involved. And then they make this. They make something that is wildly contradictory, doesn't feel like it fits with the original film, and is just all around just taking on its own merits. Just a bad film.
Yeah.
Okay, so James Cameron says that the best thing that a sequel can do is work on its own merits. This sure doesn't do that. Even if you hadn't seen the original Highlander, you'd still be going, wait, hang on a minute.
Well, the producers have implied that if you're familiar with Highlander, it's fine, but if you aren't familiar, with the franchise, this movie can work on its own. As you say, it doesn't work on its own. You still will be baffled by elements of it and the rules set within it. Yeah, it doesn't. If you watch all three of them together, Highlander 1 to 3, or probably 4 with Endgame, the Source, we can forget about that. But it's still the odd one out, isn't it?
It's still the odd one out, and still doesn't make any sense.
But still, actually, ultimately, is still the most fascinating out of all of them, I think, possibly. Maybe, Endgame's got problems with multiple edits as well.
Yeah, well, Endgame had lots of problems because I think there's at least 3 major cuts of Endgame. There's a work print that's on the DVD, there's the theatrical version, and then there was the producer's cut. And the producer's cut is largely a response to people being very negative about the theatrical cut and reinstating a lot of material and chopping out things that the fans didn't like, which again, like in the case of Highlander 2, introduces more problems. Because the big controversy with that movie, we were talking about the no fighting on holy ground rule. In that film, the villain of it, played by Bruce Payne, there's a sanctuary where where immortals essentially go into an eternal sleep, but they're safe. They're on holy ground, so no one's going to decapitate them there. And then the villain of the movie just strolls in and kills everyone with no consequence whatsoever.
Oh, God. As we mentioned earlier, with the great sequence where they use their powers to get into the base, where they get shot to bits. I mean, amazing sort of, squibs all over their legs and bodies. It was really, that's like proper Paul Verhoeven style, like Total Recall, violence there on camera. Which is a great, she still would have died though, because they shot everything,
Yeah, I don't think the boot's going to give her much protection. But because fans were so up in arms about that moment in Endgame, in the producer's cut, they removed all the references to it being placed on holy ground, which just makes it more of a problem, because why would they do that on somewhere where they know they're going to be vulnerable?
Oh, for God's sake, they really do. God's sake, they try and bend the rules and they try and correct it again later on, but thus they can't do anything about it because they've got no footage to change it to.
It was written in the script.
Christ almighty. This is one funny bit in the movie I love, is when the doctor just goes, Larry! Just like
Oh, there he goes.
I love that bit.
I think the other big change in Endgame was there's the fight scene between the two McLeods takes place on a rooftop that has a giant JVC sign on it throughout the entire scene. And in the producer's cut, they blur that out. And then they go, oh, we didn't know. It was just an accident. We didn't notice. You didn't notice the giant neon sign in the entirety of this scene.
Fucking idiots.
This crucial scene.
I'm sure one of the producers of the whole of the Highlander films and TV shows had died in a skiing accident, didn't he?
Yeah, I think they did die a few years ago.
Is it Bill Panzer or something like that? I think the surname was Panzer. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah. But I suppose the producers, really, who've been controlling these films since the first one, have, as I suppose, been the ones to blame for all these kind of continuity gaffes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only sequel that you could kind of get away with without having a whole tangle of continuity is Highlander 3, which itself has problems because the whole plot of that is that what's his face, Mario Van Peebles, he got buried under a rockfall, and somehow that made him not count in the game.
yeah. As I said earlier, it's like, if you just forgot, oh God, I forgot about him.
Yeah, the supernatural force just forgot.
Yeah. I mean, that was directed by another gentleman who did music videos like Russell Mulcahy, but he didn't go on to do other feature films. He kind of went back into, what he was skilled at. And that film was kind of visually, it's quite interesting in places, but it is a bit cheap, and it tries to throw any sort of CGI effects that don't particularly work very well. But it's the only one out of these kind of sequels that is somewhat coherent and follows on from the first one. It's ignoring the events of number 2, and that was, you know, when that film came out, they were very much like, oh, this ignores number 2.
Yeah, it was.
You know.
I think it was nicknamed by fans Highlander the Apology.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that was it. Because Highlander, what was the sort of tag name? Was it Final Dimension?
It was Final Dimension or the Sorcerer. It goes by both names.
That's right. Yeah, Sorcerer's probably
the more fitting one.
Yeah, fitting. Final Dimension. It just makes no sense. What dimension? You know.
Yeah. So again, we're kind of the US cut mushes these scenes around because now this prison Max, they're watching them in a different facility, and then after they escape, they're clearly in a different place.
Yeah. I mean, this is also they never really explain the powers they have. I mean, there is in the first one there's a hint that McLeod can sort of somewhat communicate with animals because he can hear the deer's heartbeat. And then later on, when he's at the zoo, he kind of stares at the lion or the tiger to make it calm down.
Which makes no sense and has never been established before, never been established since even.
And in this one, for some reason, Ramirez can use some energy force to slow down the fan. You know, and so they can get away in time. It's just they obviously had this idea to use this ginormous fan. What can we do? And this is what they've cobbled together, probably before shooting. You know,
they went, okay, what would be a threat to the Immortals that the villains could actually spring upon them? Oh, we'll put it on a giant fan that could potentially decapitate them. But then they don't ask the next question. Okay, so why would this maximum security prison just have a massive room that has a giant rotating fan that would drop down on someone?
Which the fan isn't going particularly quick, is it? You could easily just grab onto one of those blades and just climb up. You know,
no,
if you're quick enough.
It's not going fast enough to feel like a considerable threat. But no, Ramirez is going to pull some Deus Ex Machina nonsense.
And when it kills him, it just turns into like a beam of light and just sort of mushes into the ground. I mean, I think it'd be far more horrific, really. But he seems to teleport himself away into who knows where.
Yeah, he does some sort of Obi-Wan Kenobi fading out of existence trick.
Yeah. I remember I'm not sure if they improved the visual effect here. But
no, they didn't.
It's
the same one.
Yeah, I remember it's been pretty bad.
I think they might have added some additional sparklies maybe, but that's about it. Although really, the thing that needs to be changed, aside from literally everything about this stupid scene, is the bagpipe music.
Oh God, yes! Oh my God's sake! But he's a Spaniard, isn't he? Or he's Egyptian, isn't he? Yeah. So he has no connection to Scotland apart from meeting Connor there.
Yeah. It's just. That is what pulls it way past this is just ridiculously cheesy.
Oh dear. That's not good. And it creates a massive flame.
See, they're watching that explosion in the scene where they were watching it before, whereas in the other cut, they're in a completely different building. Having a conversation that has been awkwardly spliced to somehow coincide with what they've just seen, even though it wasn't. So this is the notable bit where they went back and reshot at this.
Yes, I think I'm trying to think if it's that scene, because I recall them saying they'd shot a little bit, so maybe it was that part there they'd shot, and then everything else here is going to be new stuff they shot like 4 years later. And Christophe Lambert didn't really care about it, you know. He didn't want it. It's like going back to eating like leftovers, you know. Yeah, that's what we referred it to.
This does look like they pasted it in later.
I mean, it's another sort of clunky fight they do. It's all sort of choreographed very quickly. You know, it's like the moment from Terminator 2 or something. You know, he's just trying to get away from the T-1000 or something. You know, it doesn't. It's not fun to watch, you know.
You can clearly tell this wasn't part of the original photography because it doesn't match photography wise.
No,
it doesn't have the look that the same rest of the film does, even as they've
had to sort of change the colour grading for it to match the sky with the shield. So
it's really clumsily done. You can tell they just shot this in some desert in probably California somewhere.
Probably over a couple of days. That was it. I mean, they were shooting this just for the Laserdisc version.
Yeah.
It was good. It shows you that they had, I think Lionsgate had probably helped fund some of this.
Yeah, they did. They're credited in this version's credits. Although I think they have lost the rights to this particular version. I think the rights lie with I think Paramount have the rights to Highlander 2 now, because
Really?
they now own the Republic catalogue, and I think Highlander 2 was part of the Republic catalogue.
Oh wow, I didn't know about that. Because Highlander, weirdly, because it was distributed, the first one was distributed by Canon in a number of territories. People still get confused. People are like, "Oh, it's my favourite Canon film." They didn't make it, guys. They just distributed it.
They they just distributed it because they bought out Thorn EMI, didn't they? And yeah.
That's right, and
they were the ones that really made it.
But that's obviously now in the hands of Studio Canal, and it's been like that ever since. Really, I would have thought if it was a Canon catalogue title at one point, it would have been under MGM's banner.
I think I can't work out what the situation with this film is in the UK, because these recuts have never been issued in the UK officially on DVD. I think Entertainment still has their rights to it.
Are they still around, aren't they? Entertainment Video.
Yeah, they're still around. Their 4:3 DVD is the only way you can watch it in the UK officially.
Oh dear. Because I remember that came out, that DVD, because it went very early on in the DVD format, wasn't it, when that came out? I've seen that in HMV. It's just like, looks on the back, it just said 4:3. I was like, no.
So this scene was in the British release. It's not in the UK version, but this it's a sequence where they're climbing up out of one of the shield outposts to look past to check the ozone layer. And this seems like a fairly crucial scene to have in your movie, given that it's about the plot and they're checking to see whether it is true that the ozone layer is normal before they destroy it. But no, it's not in the US cut at all.
It's just like a scene of Pinch from Supergirl, just trying to escape from the Phantom Zone with Peter O'Toole.
In the British version, that happens way, way earlier. It happens in the middle act of the movie somewhere.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my god! How would that fit into it though?
I think the British version might have had the coordinates bit in it, which might have. So okay, they're going together and they're going to the coordinates, but it doesn't. Here it obviously makes more sense because it's in the originally intended position.
Okay. I still actually I do want to see the British cut.
Yeah,
how that sort of plays
that's
out.
why it became a bit of a white whale. I've been chasing after it for years.
Yeah, haven't you? Because someone on Twitter, didn't they? I think they may have tagged you or me, but someone had found the Hong Kong Laserdisc of the film, but it's a 4:3 disc. But it is that cut.
There is a I think one of the German releases is literally a scan of their theatrical cut, which does have some censorship edits in it, but it is that same version. It's mostly to get the best version of the ending. The fairy tale ending, we'll bring that up when we get to it, but the fairy tale ending is legendary because it's so unbelievably bad and so goofy.
Oh, is that where he flies into the air, doesn't he?
Yeah, that one.
That's great, isn't it?
Just so absolutely preposterous that I think audiences just completely rejected it.
Because it was, but when I'd written my retrospective, because I scanned back through the internet trying to find sort of reviews at the time, but there was one reported, maybe in Starburst or something like that, that audiences were kind of leaving the movie halfway through.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever walked out of a movie, like a new film I've paid to see. Because I'm thinking, no, I've paid to see this, I'm going to sit through it no matter what. The footage here is like standard definition. It's like dropped in quality.
It's
really
dropped
bad.
off a cliff. So this scene is entirely new to the later versions. And again, it makes the characters have a bit more sense in their interaction here. Because in the US version, it's a very abrupt scene of them responding to the heroes escaping from the fan trap, and the pure purpose of the scene is to just bump off John C. McGinley as quickly as possible. So I think there's actually dialogue in the US cut that's not in this version, where says something like, "It looks like you really fucked up, eh, partner?" or something like that.
That's
as
right,
if
yeah.
that was his trap in the first place when it wasn't.
Also, here comes the sort of the nasty death here. Well, squeezing his balls. But that was, as I mentioned earlier, with the sort of wobbly effects. If everyone's got the theatrical cut at home, those shots of the power station in the background is just one of the worst kind of effect shots in the movie. Really bad.
Yeah. Again, Katana's MO just seems to be kill someone who points out how stupid he is. Like, he just kills John C. McGinley's character in the longer version. It's just established that he just bumps him off, not for telling him off for being wrong, even though he wasn't. He kills him because he claims that McLeod is coming after him when he proves, oh no, he's going after the shield. Yeah. And then he just bumps him off for that. It makes no sense.
Also, they've improved the visual effect of the shield beam here, haven't they? Because they've had this sort of spiraling effect in the middle. Because in the original one, it's just this big beam of white light that's just kind of wobbling in the background. It's got Ramirez's sword again, which is good. Yeah, I think he's. Wait a minute, didn't he have a different sword earlier? I swear that's a continuity gaffe. Because didn't Ramirez leave his sword there, or did he take it with him?
Yeah, I seem to recall that it might have actually still been in the fan room when it crushed him.
Yeah, because I don't recall him running away with two swords,
I should mention that there is a weird instance where footage appears to have been removed from this longer version that was in previous iterations. There's a scene where Virginia Madsen's character and Connor, they both end up encountering guards of the shield complex firing at them, and McLeod leaves her to go out and fight Katana and destroy the shield.
Yes. Is that? I think that scene's in the Renegade cut, and they've actually removed it in this version.
Yeah, they've removed it in this version. It was in the original Renegade cut,
right?
But for some reason, both of those scenes are deleted in this one, which creates a weird jump.
Yeah, it's
why she's disappeared.
They can't make their mind up, can they? They just keep changing everything. It's the first film, with in its kind of proper running time, it's just shy of 2 hours long. Then they release number 2 theatrically. It's like 90 minutes. I mean, half an hour shorter. And I think even fans would. If you look at the runtime of movies now, when if you see a sequel come out to say Iron Man or Captain America, it's like 90 minutes long. You'd be like, "There's a problem with this film."
Yeah.
And then this one, it's got varying degrees of runtimes from its different iterations where they're trying to restore it to its supposed original vision. And as you say, it's
also trying to retcon same vision simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, I never like this animated lightning stuff. It's too choppy. It doesn't seem. If you look at something like Big Trouble in Little China, there's some really good animated sort of fluid lightning.
See, now she appears out of nowhere.
Yeah, just popped up.
Again, I think that's because they didn't have the last part of that scene. The last time we see her before she pops up is that she's still holding back the gunfire.
Well, showing that scene, though, gave her something to do within the story.
Yeah.
Now you've cut it out, she's had, less things to do as a character. He just walks into the beam. When the explosion goes off, the miniature of the roof of the power station, just it's like bits of cardboard.
Yeah. And then when it cuts into the building, there is no debris anywhere, even though it would have crushed them. It's worth noting that Ramirez's line there, "It'll take both of you to destroy the shield," not accurate because it only takes him. But also, that's not in the US version, so he just does that because I guess he feels like that's going to destroy it. I mean, it's a good thing for humanity that there is an exploding Scotsman to destroy the shield that cannot be turned off.
They've added extra flames, haven't they, to the building? And when she looks up to the stars, you can see there's added some flames.
It's completely clean, even though the roof was blown off.
Yeah, she added some, comped in some rubble. But it's just the theatrical cut just ends with him just smiling at camera, doing his Christopher Lambert smile and cheeky laugh.
It's at this point that we should probably bring up the infamous fairy tale ending.
Yes, go for it.
So, the international editions, when first released, had this scene, but it continues on to have him say, "Oh, well, I am going back to my home planet like Poochie. See that little star beyond the moon? That's where I'm going, in a field absolutely filled with stars."
Which one? Because it's a deleted scene. Most people see it now, as it's on the Laserdisc and all that stuff, and DVDs and stuff. It's just an incomplete visual effects shot. It's from like a work print.
The weird thing about the version that's included on the Blu-ray deleted scenes is that alternate ending is totally... Oh man, that effect looks bad, where they've comped in the original credits onto this new star field.
Yeah, it just like freeze frames, then the credits kick in.
You can see how low res the original text was and the outlines of the original... Oh god. But yeah, the versions that's on the Blu-ray of the alternate ending appears to have been made up entirely of alternate takes. It appears to have been made up... They obviously found the takes they didn't use and reassembled it out of that, as opposed to the actual takes they used to assemble it, because there is a sort of low quality bootleg of that ending online.
Okay.
And there is actually a proper, I would say, completed in the loosest sense of the term, in that you've got this blue glow around Christopher Lambert and eventually Virginia Madsen, as he's floating up in the air, and he's going, "Ha ha ha ha, it's a kind of magic."
Oh god, yeah. Well, they had to. He's got to do it. He's got to throw in his laugh, hasn't he?
Yeah,
as he always does.
And they had to throw in the Queen line just in case you forgot.
Well, yeah, it's been an interesting sort of discussion on this movie, because I think it's like the British cut is something I really want to see, just down to out of curiosity, really, if that kind of works a little bit better than the US version. And it's a film that isn't a sequel to Highlander, whatever they try and sell as even with its title, but it's just an oddity that kind of exists on its own, really, despite having this sort of the characters returning into a world which isn't familiar and doesn't stick to the continuity of the other ones. As pointed out earlier on, it's that the world he lives in is this kind of mad vision of the futures with 40s technology in places. It's very peculiar. I
would say it's one of the most fascinating bad movies of all time, both in front and behind the camera.
Oh, definitely. With even the talent involved with this movie, like director, writers, possibly not writers, but directors and composer and performers to sign on to this, knowing what direction the film was going. It's maybe they just didn't realise at the time the value of Highlander and its strengths with its original conception and mythology, and just thought, we can just we've got loads of money, that people love it anyway, we can just go any direction we want and people will just accept it, because I suppose in some people's eyes the first one wasn't a huge success, but now let's try and improve upon it. And what they've dug themselves into a massive hole, and then from then on they've really kind of struggled to maintain any sense of cohesion with the mythology.
It's the kind of bad movie that taints the original by association, and certainly I think damaged many people's opinions of the entire franchise, although I think everything that came after that might have also played into that.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's still, Endgame is, as you say, it's still very messy, with it attempting sort of, I suppose, to sort of bring the TV series in line with the film, by having the actor from that return. I mean, obviously Christopher Lambert did. I think he popped up in the first few episodes of the Highlander TV show, but I suppose he was the one that sort of on a theatrical level was everyone recognised, and not the gentleman from the TV show. But it's I'm sure they will attempt to reboot Highlander in the future at some point. I mean, there's always talk about it, but
yeah, they do keep talking about it, because I heard at one point Justin Lin of the Fast and Furious movies was going to direct it. So I heard at one point Dave Bautista was going to be the Kurgan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But whenever they reboot it, it's going to be one of those movies that doesn't actually have an ending, because we need franchise potential.
Yeah.
We can't have Connor claiming the prize. There needs to be sequences. There needs to be more sequels. We need to have a whole universe of characters.
Yeah.
And so, that's going to be the main objective of it. And so it's going to be a movie without an ending.
Oh, definitely. Well, it'll be an ending that is just left open for them to be sequels, and then I think it's the one thing they could do to improve upon the first film is to really kind of expand the history of these characters and who the villains are and how things how things came to be. Because everything's got, as I said earlier, it was kind of spoke very loosely in loose terms, to sort of kickstart the story. But yeah, it won't be the same though. If they remake it without Queen's music, and it just won't be Highlander. To me.
Yeah, it needs to license out Queen's music, because it's so ingrained into the identity of what Highlander is. I think that Highlander could benefit from a reboot. It's desperately needed a clean slate for a very long time now.
God,
let's be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't have gone beyond 3, to be honest, but it's 3 as most people know, is was attempted at course correction, but still had its own problems that came with it. But yeah, it is a bad film, but ultimately kind of fun to watch with friends, and as an interesting production, thus makes it kind of an interesting kind of look back on how a sequel should not be made.
Yeah, it is a proper big budget folly, but in the most fascinating way. It's definitely up there with probably one of my personal favourite bad movies. One of the ones that you can kind of introduce to people and go, yeah, I get why you're kind of fascinated by these train wrecks.
Well, everyone, that is the end of the commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. And me and Matthew will be back with some more in the future. Okay, everyone, take care and goodbye.